He was a devoted husband, a churchgoer, a factory worker, a quiet man who blended into the background. But Gary Ridgway was also one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He murdered at least 49 women, and possibly more than 90. And for 2 decades he walked free, hiding behind the mask of normalcy. This is the story of the Green River Killer, his chilling double life, his decades-long killing spree, and how investigators finally brought him down. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was the middle child in a troubled family. His father worked as a bus driver and often talked openly about his hatred for sex workers. His mother, stern and overbearing, kept a tight grip on her sons. Ridgway would later confess to having disturbing sexual fantasies about his mother, even fantasizing about killing her. As a child, he wet the bed well into his teens, and his mother would wash him in humiliating ways. In later psychological evaluations, these early traumas would be seen as the roots of his violence. After high school, where he was considered a below-average student, Ridgway joined the Navy. He was sent to Vietnam and frequented sex workers during his time overseas. He contracted gonorrhea, and his rage and resentment toward women began to grow. When he returned home, he settled into the Seattle area. He got married again and again. He worked as a truck painter, went to church every Sunday. He read the Bible aloud at home and condemned prostitution. But behind that quiet life, a monster was waiting. In the early 1980s, bodies began turning up near Seattle's Green River. The first known victim was 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield. Her body was found floating in the river on July 15, 1982. Within weeks, 4 more bodies were discovered nearby. All were young women, all had a history of sex work, all had been strangled and dumped like garbage. The killer showed signs of organization. He left few clues, no fingerprints, no DNA. Police were stumped, and the press gave him a name that would become infamous: the Green River Killer. What authorities didn't know was that Ridgway had already developed a chilling pattern. He would pick up women along the Pacific Highway South, often sex workers or runaways. He'd gain their trust. Calm, smiling, promising a quick job. Then he would drive them to isolated wooded areas, and once they were vulnerable, he'd strangle them with his hands or ligatures, often while having sex. Sometimes he'd return to the bodies to engage in necrophilia. The King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force in 1984. It was one of the biggest investigations in Washington state history. Hundreds of leads came in, dozens of suspects were interviewed, but the killer was always one step ahead. One suspect stood out: Gary Ridgway. He had once been arrested for soliciting sex workers. He even admitted to knowing several victims. Police interviewed him multiple times. But Ridgway passed a polygraph test in 1984, and with no physical evidence, he slipped through the cracks. In a twist of fate, another man entered the investigation: Ted Bundy, yes, the infamous serial killer. Bundy was on death row and offered to help profile the Green River Killer. He suggested the killer would return to the bodies, that he was reliving the crimes. Bundy was disturbingly correct. But even with Bundy's insights, investigators had no proof, and the bodies kept appearing. Most of the Green River Killer's victims were young women between 14 and 25. Many were runaways, some were sex workers, others were simply vulnerable. Their names deserve to be remembered: Wendy Caulfield, Deborah Bonner, Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and dozens more. Ridgway confessed that killing them made him feel in control. He believed he was cleaning up the streets. He once told police, "I picked prostitutes as my victims because I hate most prostitutes. I did not want to pay them for sex." But his twisted logic masked something even darker. He enjoyed killing, and because he chose victims on the margins of society, he believed no one would notice. Tragically, for a long time, and he was right. In the 1990s, forensic science began to catch up. Evidence from some of the early crime scenes had been preserved, including traces of semen. But it wasn't until 2001 that DNA testing had advanced enough to make a breakthrough. New tests linked Ridgway to 4 victims: Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Christensen. It was the smoking gun police had waited for. Gary Ridgway was arrested on November 30th, 2001, as he left work at the truck factory. At first, he denied everything, but under pressure and facing the death penalty, he began to talk and talk. What Ridgway revealed stunned even veteran detectives. He confessed to killing 71 women, though authorities could only confirm 49. He described the killings in chilling detail: how he picked up victims, how he strangled them, how he returned to the corpses. He would often dump the bodies in clusters. Some sites held up to 5 victims. He remembered them only by vague descriptions. The one with the curly hair, the one in the red sweater. His memory was spotty, but his indifference was terrifying. To avoid the death penalty, Ridgway agreed to a plea deal. He would help locate as many victims as possible in exchange for life in prison. It was a painful deal for families, but many supported it just to know where their daughters had been left. On December 18, 2003, Gary Ridgway was sentenced to 48 life terms without the possibility of parole. One by one, the families of the victims stood in court to face him. Some cried, some yelled. One father simply said, "You had your choice, Gary, she didn't." Then something unexpected happened. The father of victim Linda Rule looked at Ridgway and said, "I forgive you." Ridgway began to cry. It was one of the only moments where the mask slipped. Today, Gary Ridgway sits in a high-security prison in Washington state. He is now in his 70s. He has no chance of release. He has admitted to killing dozens more than he was charged with, and some of his victims have never been found. The story of the Green River Killer is a chilling reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight, and how one man lived 2 lives: husband, worker, churchgoer by day, and serial killer by night. For the families of his victims, the pain never ends, but their stories, their names, and their lives deserve to be remembered, because justice is not just about punishment, it's about never forgetting those who were lost. A woman walking her dog stumbles across a human bone in the desert. Police arrive, they dig, and what they find shocks the nation. 11 bodies, all female, all buried within yards of each other on Albuquerque's West Mesa. All had vanished years before, and most had been forgotten. But the question remains, who buried them, and is the West Mesa Bone Collector still out there? It was February 2nd, 2009. A woman named Christine Ross was walking her dog in a quiet, undeveloped area on the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Her dog stopped, sniffed something strange, and started digging. What he uncovered wasn't trash. It was a human femur. Christine called the police. Officers arrived, expecting maybe a single body. But what they found, was far worse. Over the next few weeks, excavators unearthed the remains of 11 women and 1 unborn baby. The grave site stretched across 92 acres. Local media dubbed the killer the West Mesa Bone Collector, and for the families of missing women in Albuquerque, the horror had just begun. The victims were young, most in their teens or 20s. All had disappeared between 2003 and 2005. Most were known to be involved in sex work or drug use, and many had criminal records or troubled pasts. But they were daughters, sisters, mothers. They mattered. Their disappearances were barely covered by the media at the time. In fact, several weren't even listed as missing until their bones were found. How did 11 women go missing and almost no one notice? In the early 2000s, Albuquerque's South Valley was a harsh place. It was plagued by methamphetamine use, poverty, and prostitution. For sex workers, it was dangerous. Many women went missing, and police, overwhelmed and underfunded, often didn't pursue the cases aggressively. Worse, some investigators viewed these women as throwaways. Several of the victims had been last seen on East Central Avenue, a known hotspot for drugs and sex work. Family members raised red flags. Some even begged police to look closer. But it wasn't until the desert gave up its secrets that people began to listen. And by then, it was too late.